What you're hearing is Hardie fiber cement siding living up to its reputation as the siding that helps resist weather damage, no matter what Mother Nature throws its way. James Hardie knows how important a reputation is, especially when you're a home builder. That's why Hardie products withstand the elements better than wood-based siding, with styles to match their strength. Because when home builders work with us, we deliver our best so they can look their best. Protect your reputation with exterior products by James Hardie.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to National Park After Dark. I know this is a stark change because there was no intro.
It's a cold start. Sorry to startle you.
Hey.
So if you're new here, you're not gonna really understand what's happening because this episode has nothing. Well, maybe it has something to do with national parks on your end.
I have a national park site on my end.
I do not. Okay, so here's the deal. Our show, for those of you who are new, is about national parks and sharing dark stories within them. So usually dark history, survival stories, animal attacks, things like that. Things of that nature. However, today we decided to switch it up a little bit, and we are both going to share a story, and mine has nothing to do with a national park. Why did we decide to do this? Unclear.
I think I know where it began, and it's kind of morphed. So a few episodes ago, we mentioned that it would be fun to do conspiracy theories as a whole episode. And then we talked about it, and other people after the episode were like, yeah, that would be really fun. And I think the original plan was that we would like find a bunch of conspiracy theories and talk about them. And instead, we each found a singular story that we find intriguing and have decided to tell it all in one episode. So it's a combined episode instead of one or the other.
Yeah. Oh, wait. You did forget part of that metamorphosis, because the second part, we're like, okay, conspiracy theories. And then we were going to do them based in places that we've physically visited and been to.
Oh, yes.
Either on our personal travels or on group trips that we've done with listeners. So we're like, okay, yeah, that's perfect. So I kind of followed that. My story does take place somewhere we have been with a National Park After Dark group trip, but it has nothing to do with a conspiracy. And yours has to do with a conspiracy, but it is not somewhere we have been with a group.
No, I've never even been here in my personal life either.
Oh, okay. Well, here we are. So basically this episode is going to be fun. It just does not follow our normal shtick. So
yeah, it's kind of like when we did that, not quite the same, but when we did a combined episode where we each told a story in Banff, we're kind of doing the same vibe where we each just are coming with totally separate, not related stories to jump into. And Danielle has not told me a word about her story, minus the fact that I know it's in Egypt.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I've never been so tight-lipped before. And I know yours has to do with aliens, maybe, in Florida.
Yes, but I also kept it tight-lipped, kind of, but not that much.
Okay, this is like, I feel so awkward without our normal start. Isn't that odd? How if we don't like do our normal thing, I feel very clunky.
Yeah, because we always have our intro that we read to each other and then we can react. And now we're just, like you said, cold start.
Yeah, well, let's put everyone out of their misery and just share some stories. Yeah, get on with it already. Okay, so I am going first. And okay, I'm so excited. Okay. Today, I will be taking us back to the location of our very first National Park After Dark trip, which, like you said, is in Egypt, for a truly fascinating story. If you are a fan of ancient history, some famous names in the Egyptology world may ring a bell. Howard Carter, most famous for the discovery of the tomb of King Tut, or Giovanni Belzoni, who was remembered for his greatest discovery, the tomb of Seti I, which is remarkably well preserved and sat untouched for over 3,000 years before it was first re-entered in 1817. And then there was Jean-Francois Champollion, who cemented his name in history by deciphering the famed Rosetta Stone. These men did extraordinary things for the field and came from all sorts of backgrounds. Carter was a trained archaeologist. Belzoni began his career actually as a circus strongman before moving on to an engineering career, and Champollion was mostly self-taught in ancient languages and history. These men are amongst dozens of Egyptian enthusiasts that at some point in time learned about the ancient civilization and dedicated their lives to understanding it better. But one woman's path was quite different. For her, it wasn't as much about learning about the Egyptians, but rather remembering. This is the condensed story of Dorothy Eady, one of the Western world's most intriguing and convincing modern cases of reincarnation.
Oh, I'm excited. This will be fun. I'm ready.
Have you ever heard of this woman before?
No, I've heard of different stories of people who believed to be reincarnated, especially people from World War II era, but never this woman.
Never this woman. Okay, perfect. Dorothy Eady was born in London in 1904. She was the only child to Reuben and Caroline Eady, and at the age of 3, Dorothy slipped and fell down the stairs at her home while she was playing, and she was knocked unconscious. Frantic, her mother rang for the doctor, who came immediately to help Dorothy. However, after several tests and a couple of hours, she was pronounced dead by the physician. Her mother was absolutely inconsolable, and everyone in the home flocked to her to lend their support. Dorothy's body was placed on her bed and shut in her room while the doctor left to fill out the death certificate and to gather a nurse to help him prepare the body to be transported to the funeral home. However, when he returned just an hour later, everyone was shocked when they opened the door to see Dorothy sitting up in her bed and playing. She had no outward signs of trauma or injury, and despite the confusion and emotional turmoil that the family experienced that day, the relief that their daughter was alive was palpable, and everyone kind of just moved on.
You're like, I don't know what happened, but I'm glad it did.
And I'm glad she's okay. And yeah, and they just kind of left it at that. Shortly after her accident, Dorothy began having frequent and intense emotional breakdowns. She would cry and hide underneath their kitchen table and throughout their home. Dorothy was inconsolable, and her parents would repeatedly ask her what was wrong, and she would repeatedly answer, "I want to go home." Despite her parents' best efforts to console her and assurance that she was home and everything was okay, Dorothy's pleas continued. After some time of this, Caroline finally asked Dorothy, in exasperation, if this isn't home, then where is? Dorothy replied that she didn't know, but it was clear to everyone that she was desperate to find it. Around the same time, as she turned 4 years old, Dorothy began having reoccurring dreams of a large stone building with towering columns, with expansive, lush gardens and pools, and while awake, she would slip in and out of a heavy foreign accent while speaking. Confounded but not exactly sure what to do about any of this, her parents did their best to reassure Dorothy that she was home and to carry on with life as normal. So they're kind of just at a loss, okay, this is kind of weird, but
I mean, what do you do?
What are we going to do? She's 4, and a lot of that I think they were kind of just chalking up to she's a child, and children sometimes do odd things.
Mm-hmm.
One day, Caroline and Reuben brought her along for their outing to the British Museum. Established in 1759 and located in Bloomsbury, London, this public museum is dedicated to human history, art, and culture. Possessing the largest collection of artifacts in the world, which numbers at about 8 million.
Wow.
Throughout the museum. Yeah, it's huge. It ranks amongst the oldest, most visited, and most fascinating museums globally. The visit began how most visits to a museum with a 4-year-old would typically go. Dorothy was completely disinterested in her surroundings and what she was doing. As they meandered throughout the exhibit halls, she was fidgeting, occasionally fussing as they went, kind of just putting up a stink, being bored, not wanting to be there.
Not really understanding what's around her.
Yeah.
Just what is this weird building?
But as they rounded the corner to the Egyptian exhibits, Dorothy's behavior instantly changed. Ripping her hand free from her mother's, she ran throughout the hall with wide eyes. She pressed her little hands to the glass panels and stared at awe at what lay behind them. She knelt to the ground in front of statues and kissed their feet, and even spoke angrily at other visitors for wearing their shoes in the Egyptian exhibit halls, quote unquote, in the presence of gods. When it was time to leave, her parents called for her to come, but she didn't budge from where she sat next to the glass case containing a mummy. Approaching their daughter and urging her to follow them, she responded in an unusual voice, which her mother later described as that of a strange old woman. She said, "Leave me here. These are my people." Ultimately, Caroline had to physically remove her daughter from the museum. She's 4.
She's 4 years old and having these. I know, like, just the way she's speaking, I'm like, what 4-year-old talks like this?
And in the book, I'll obviously talk more about the book and reference it later, but in the book, it literally, her mom dropped her. Like, she was like holding her, like, we have to go. And she said that in that weird old voice, and she physically dropped her on the ground.
She's like, what the fuck is this?
Several years passed, and Dorothy remained adamant about wanting to go home. What originally was thought of as typical struggles of a toddler instead became clear this sentiment was unshakable. In 1911, when Dorothy was 7, her father brought home a children's encyclopedia, which had a section on the Rosetta Stone, a slab of granite stone inscribed in 196 BC by a group of Egyptian clergymen and Egypt's ruler, Ptolemy V. The stone was written with a combination of hieroglyphs, demotic, which I looked up because I'm like, what is that? And it, at the very bare minimum, it's a sort of everyday script that was used at that time in Egypt.
Okay.
And also ancient Greek. So there's 3 different types of languages going on here. Dorothy had scanned through the pages of the encyclopedia and stopped at this section on the Rosetta Stone. She read it over repeatedly and even began examining the photos of the stone with a magnifying glass, telling her parents, "I know what this says. I have forgotten it, but perhaps I will remember." Then, several months later, while scanning a separate publication, a magazine that her father had brought home, Dorothy saw in ink what she had been seeing for years in her reoccurring dreams. It was the temple of Seti I, also known as the Great Temple of Abydos, one of the main historical sites in the city of Abydos, one of the oldest in all of Egypt. Dorothy eagerly collected the magazine and told her parents while excitedly pointing at the photo, saying, this is it, this is my home, while showing them the photo. Elated and relieved after all the years of torment and wanting to feel more at peace, she felt things were finally starting to come together and make sense. But the photograph wasn't exactly what she saw in her dreams. The temple was in her dreams for sure, but it was devoid of the lush gardens with trees and flowers and fruit trees and all this different vegetation that she sees a lot, or she saw a lot in her dreams.
Mm-hmm.
This one in the photo was clearly old, devoid of any greenery, and it was crumbling. Soon after, when gazing upon a mummy of Seti I, she immediately recognized him as a friend, someone that she had known, respected, and quite highly regarded and admired. While her parents largely dismissed Dorothy's claims, encouraged by some of the pieces coming together in her mind over the next few years, Dorothy did everything that she could to teach herself about Egypt and its people. She continued to act, quote-unquote, strangely as well. She refused to wear footwear, argued with her Sunday school teachers that Christianity is nothing compared to the ancient Egyptian religion, which ultimately ended the relationship between her teachers and herself, to put it lightly.
That's like, for a child to be making statements like that.
In the early 1900s also.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And adamant, not just like off the cuff comments. She was adamant. And although she continued to attend mass at her local Catholic church, because she later said she enjoyed the rituals of church,
mm-hmm.
She had a particularly heated discussion with the priest one day regarding how, although she did attend, she wasn't a Catholic. Instead, she enjoyed how Mass reminded her of the old religion and continued on to explain the virtues of Egyptian religion to him. After that, the priest asked her parents to keep Dorothy away from his church. She was also expelled from school after an altercation with one of her teachers after she was scolded for not participating in reciting a hymn that spoke ill of the Egyptians. There was one line in the hymn that kind of, for lack of a better term, like kind of shit on the Egyptians.
Do you know what it was?
It's in the book. I didn't write it down just because I didn't want to get like too hefty into the religious aspects of this because it does go into great detail.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, she just refused to speak ill of the Egyptians, and that meant not fully reciting the hymn. They got into an altercation. She actually threw a book at the teacher. So that was the altercation.
And how old is she at this point?
She's like 10 or 11 at this point.
Wow.
Yeah. So she's adamant that she's not going to do anything that would speak ill of the Egyptians or bring any sort of shame onto that ancient culture or religion. And it ruffled a lot of feathers in her life. School from then on was clearly a struggle. And Dorothy, 10 at this time, would often skip classes and opt to spend her time in the Egyptian exhibit of the museum. She spent so much time there that her presence caught the attention of a man named Ernest Wallace Budge, an Egyptologist who worked at the museum. He took a liking to Dorothy. Clearly, she's like, obviously, I know children go to museums, but usually it's for like a school trip or you're there with your parents or you're not there on your own volition.
It's not like you are passionate. Usually children are not passionate about history and museums.
Correct. So he really noticed Dorothy, especially as she kept going to that exhibit repeatedly and she was there so often. And he took a liking to her and found her passion, especially at such a young age, very intriguing. He taught her how to read hieroglyphics by giving her passages from the Egyptian Book of the Dead to translate. She committed several hundred of the pictographs to memory and learned how to write them at such a quick rate that Wallace was astounded. When he asked her how she learned so quickly, she replied simply that she had known it all before but had forgotten, which made relearning it much easier.
He's probably like, what is going on here?
Yeah. When Dorothy turned 12, the First World War forced her to move away from her home to live with her grandmother in a rural area away from London and her beloved museum. She found a way to continue learning, though, and rode her grandmother's horse, who Dorothy actually nicknamed Muthotep, which was the name of Seti I's son's horse.
Did she know that when she named it? Okay.
Yes. She was like, oh, this is like my idol son's horse, and I'm gonna... She's 12, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of, like Misty or, I don't know, another horse name a 12-year-old girl would give to their horse or pony. Muthotep was
I like it. I like your style.
So she would ride this horse 8 miles to the nearest library to study, and of course to study anything she could about Egypt and ancient Egypt. She continued this for the next 2 years until she moved back home to London at the age of 14. Not long after her return, she had a dream that would plunge her further into her belief that she had a deep connection to Egypt. And this is a direct quote from her in the book. I half woke up, feeling a weight on my chest. Then I fully woke up and I saw this face bending over me with both hands on the neck of my nightdress. I recognized the face from a photo I had seen years before as the mummy of Seti. I was astounded and cried out, and yet I was overjoyed, and I can remember it as if it was yesterday. But it's still difficult to explain. It's the feeling of something you have waited for that has come home at last. End quote. Following this encounter, Dorothy had another reoccurring dream. She was standing in an ornately decorated room that smelled heavily of incense while men questioned her and beat her. The dream happened so often and was so upsetting, she would often wake screaming and thrashing. While the dreams upset her, Dorothy felt as if this was just another piece to her puzzle. She just had to figure out where it fit. Her parents, on the other hand, growing more and more concerned as her night terrors continued and sleepwalkings began, brought her on several occasions to a local mental hospital for psychiatric evaluations. Nothing ever did come of this, and she was never kept for long. So they were concerned enough to get her mental health evaluated and to see if there was anything that she was struggling with that could be diagnosed. But no formal diagnosis was ever given because the doctors couldn't find anything, quote unquote, wrong with her. They were confused by it and they didn't understand, but
it's
medically...
It's to put your kid in a mental institution in the early 1900s, too. She's lucky she didn't get a lobotomy.
I know.
That's wild. And it's wild that, like, I mean, women would go in there with diagnosed hysteria from their husbands or because they got their period or something. But this girl goes in there saying that she has ties to ancient Egyptian history, and they're like, she's fine.
Right. Yeah, I know. It's like, ooh, you're lucky.
Sense. Yeah, I'm just surprised.
When she turned 16, she was able to make the decision to leave or continue with official schooling. And that decision came very easy to her, and she was out of there. Leaving school behind, Dorothy took the opportunity to travel the country with her parents. Her father had quit his job as a master tailor to pursue a career in a new industry, which at the time was moving pictures. Eventually, the Eadys settled, built a large cinema complete with living quarters above it. Their theater was wildly successful and made them a very comfortable living. But Dorothy was uninterested in the cinema, and despite occasionally singing and performing there, she enrolled in art school. She dabbled in spiritual groups and ultimately moved back to London at the age of 27 for a job writing articles for an Egyptian public relations magazine promoting independence for the country. Because at this time, Egypt was fighting for their independence against Great Britain. So this was kind of a big thing at the time. It's just, what are the odds?
A writing job landed.
Yeah. While working this job, she met a man named Imam Abdul Majid. They hit it off, and despite Imam's almost immediate return to Egypt, like they met, and then within a week, he was already back going home to Egypt, they continued their relationship through letters. In 1933, he asked for Dorothy's hand in marriage. She accepted and ventured to Egypt to be with her
finally
husband.
Like, when is she gonna get to Egypt?
Here she is. After stepping off the boat, she immediately kissed the ground, and the feeling of finally being back home flooded her completely. Her marriage wasn't as smooth as she had hoped for. She butted heads with his family due to her headstrong personality, and Imam found her quite peculiar and downright awful with domestic duties. So they had a lot of, so Dorothy is I think you would categorize her as ahead of her time in regards to her personality and obviously she's very adamant and passionate about things and isn't afraid to convey that despite how others may perceive her. And of course was a rarity amongst women at this time, especially young women. It's like you conform and, do certain things.
You're expected to be a certain type of person and woman and wife and mother and
right. And she was not.
Jazz.
And she was not. So that kind of caused a little bit of a rift in her marriage right off the bat. But her new pregnancy kept everything and everyone together for a little while. She gave birth to a son who she named Seti.
I was just going to say that.
There it is. Dorothy's move to Egypt was everything that she had ever wanted, despite her issues within her marriage. And with the move came an increase in the unexplainable happenings surrounding her. Both Dorothy's mother, who came to visit after her grandson was born, and her father-in-law were fully freaked out and in disbelief after they walked into her room on separate occasions to see a pharaoh-like man standing near her bed. The second year into their marriage, Dorothy's occasional sleepwalking escalated to a new level, which frightened Imam. In the middle of the night, he would wake to find Dorothy standing at her writing desk, frantically scribbling down notes. And this happened sporadically for a year before it stopped altogether. Dorothy would later comment on those instances, saying she was in a sort of an unconscious state. She felt half awake and half asleep, and that she wasn't writing her thoughts. She was being spoken to. According to her, there was a man narrating and dictating her words, and she referred to him as Hora. He would come to her at night, startle her awake, and begin speaking to her in bits and pieces and fragments of information. At the time, Dorothy felt as if she understood as he was speaking to her and she was writing it down, but when she'd come to and kind of wake up out of this unconscious half here, half there state, she'd feel as if a fog had come over her and had a really difficult time recalling what was said to her or the meanings of her own writings. Like she couldn't even decipher it.
Oh, so she couldn't understand what she was writing?
No. After Horus stopped coming to her, Dorothy started compiling all of the information that she had written down over the year, roughly 70 pages worth of bits and pieces of hieroglyphic texts, and attempted to start translating them. What she ultimately discovered was the answer to many of her lifelong questions and gave her the clarity that she was desperate for. So the full version is obviously very long and detailed. It's over 70 pages worth of stuff, but I'm going to condense it for you. Essentially, Dorothy believes that she was told the details of her past life by this entity that would come to her in the middle of the night. A life that she had seen flashes and snippets of her entire life up until this point, either in dreams or visions or memories that she didn't think were hers, obviously weren't hers in this lifetime, and she had always been trying to make sense of. And through the writing she translated, this is the story that kind of took shape. She was born in Egypt to her mother, who was a vegetable seller, and her father, who was a soldier, and she was named Bentreshet. Her mother died when she was a child, and her father had orders to be transferred to Thebes, which is modern-day Luxor. Not wanting to take her, he gave her to a temple in Abydos, just north of Seti's temple, which at the time was under construction. A high priest took charge of her care, and at the age of 12, she was given the choice to either stay at the temple and to take vows to stay a virgin priestess, or to go out into the world and find a husband. Bentreshet decided to stay, took the vows, and was trained to act in the drama of the death and resurrection of Osiris. So that was her life. But one day, while out in the gardens, King Seti took notice of her while visiting to oversee the construction of his temple that was just a short distance away. The two had an illicit affair, and she fell pregnant, which was a dangerous position for the pharaoh for obvious reasons. Obviously, he's the king, the pharaoh, and he just knocked up just like this random virgin priestess. But also for her, she was a sworn virgin, and that was like her role. So she broke her vows. He put himself in a bad position. Word got out and spread, and she was taken down into the depths of the temple for questioning and beating by the high priest. In order to save face and to save the reputation of the man, King Seti, that she had fallen in love with, Bentreshet ended her own life. So that is the story that this alleged entity spoke to her, and it's just interesting. She thought, like, wow, this is it. She had flashes of this her whole life. Like, she recognized Seti. The beating in the temple, and like just different things. And then obviously not the temple she lived in, but the temple for Seti that they were building. She recognized from her dreams, like all these snippets were coming together. And to her, this was it. She's like, this makes sense now. 3 years into her marriage with Imam, Dorothy and they amicably divorced, and Dorothy moved herself and Seti, her son, into a small apartment overlooking the Giza pyramids and the Great Sphinx. She became the first woman to be hired with the Egyptian Department of Antiquities and worked for a world-renowned Egyptologist named Salim Hassan. When she could, she'd sleep in the pyramids, and until 1956, when the Pyramid Research Project ended, she assisted and worked with several famed Egyptologists and scholars. Over the years, she worked tirelessly and satiated her unrelenting appetite for learning everything she could about ancient Egypt. She eventually published her own papers, and despite having no formal education, became a respected scholar and expert within the field.
Well, if you've lived it.
Well, allegedly, that's the line of thinking. In 1957, she began going by Seti, meaning Mother of Seti, which is how women were known in ancient Egypt by their eldest's name. And her reputation preceded her. She took a job in Abydos, the area she believed she once lived in, and she was known by the locals for her almost unsettling knowledge of ancient Egypt, as well as her eccentric nature. The chief of antiquities happened to be visiting at the time she took her job and decided to put her to the test. At the time, the excavators of the Temple of Seti had not cataloged it in its entirety, and there were no articles regarding the layout or the contents of the temple that had been published. So he knew of her Like her reputation preceded her. And he's like, well, none of this information is out to the public yet. And if she is who she says she is, like she should know these things. So I'm going to put her to the test.
Interesting.
So she had not yet entered, like she worked in the region of Abydos, but she had not yet stepped foot in the temple because it was under excavation and they were just beginning to study it. So in complete darkness, the chief of antiquities had her come to the temple, and he called out to her to navigate him to certain places in the temple and then to stop when she arrived. And without hesitation, Seti completed all 6 of his challenges before he gave up. And she later commented that when she walked into the temple, she described it as walking into somewhere she had lived before. And of course, those things were easy. So it's like, picture your childhood home, you're blindfolded, and someone's like, okay, walk to the kitchen. And you just...
Easy.
You know the layout. You've lived there before. You understand. You know, just so he did that 6 times and she knocked it all out of the park.
I wonder, did she talk about like if she was also like, how am I doing this right now? Like she knew it was easy when she was there, but also at the same time, it's like, how is
do
this
I know
real?
these things? Yeah. She, in the book, she kind of does make comments about, for a while, she tried to understand why and how she knew these things.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually she kind of just gave up and just accepted that maybe she would never know and just accepted it for what it was. Like instead of trying to pick it apart and understand, she just kind of accepted this is who she is and just left it at that.
Yeah.
Furthermore, at this time, the gardens that she had described to her parents nearly 50 years prior from her dreams of this temple, they were not discovered yet. But she directed archaeologists to the spots she remembered the gardens being in, and lo and behold, there they were. She also pointed excavators to the north side of the temple where a hidden passageway would be revealed. And after some further digging, there it was. She was given a special exception to continue work after the normal retirement age of 60. Egyptologists remained flabbergasted regarding her countless discoveries made simply by remembering. She specialized in the Temple of Seti, but also happened to have knowledge of other locations as well. She has made claims that the lost tomb of Nefertiti is adjacent to the tomb of King Tut, and that there is a secret library hidden underneath the Sphinx. While those claims have yet to be verified or refuted, recent scans have shown evidence of rooms at both of those locations. So time will tell. Time will tell.
Interesting.
After her forced retirement, she worked part-time as a consultant and a tourist guide for the Antiquities Department at the Temple of Seti until 1972, where she would give tours barefoot through the halls of the temple, giving full explanations of every nook and cranny with a sprinkle of her hallmark humor. She made embroidered scenes of the temples, Egyptian gods, and hieroglyphics, and she would sell them to the tourists to bump up her $30 a month paycheck. Her son, at this point, now in his 30s, offered her a comfortable villa with him in Kuwait where he lived. And of course, her family also, like her parents, who at this point had passed away, but her family came from like money. I mean, they weren't super wealthy, but they were very comfortable, especially after her dad kind of ventured into the moving picture scene.
Sure, that makes sense.
And her son did well for himself as well, but she just refused every offer for a comfortable living, choosing to stay in her mud hut in Abydos. After a heart attack forced her into permanent retirement, she spent the rest of her life in Abydos, following the traditions and systems of ancient Egyptian religion until her death in April of 1981. She is buried facing west as per ancient Egyptian funerary customs, following the setting sun that served as a path to the next life. Her grave lies just northwest of Seti's temple. Seti has been featured in documentaries including the BBC and National Geographic. Her story has been covered by everyone from the New York Times to Ancient Aliens, and there are dozens of publications that detail her personal story and her professional findings. And while she remains a point of contention among many Egyptologists, and the debate regarding whether she was sane or not rages on amongst all that hear her story. But her claims have given archaeologists a run for their money with their direct truths and tangible finds. In the West, reincarnation is considered a fringe belief or like pseudoscience, with roughly 30% of Americans ascribing to it. In Eastern religions, however, reincarnation is a common belief. Rebirth in some form or another has been held in religions and belief systems dating back thousands of years. Worldwide, roughly 2 billion people believe in it today. There are thousands of documented cases of children remembering their past lives. In nearly every case, past life memories begin around 2 to 3 years old and begin to fade and disappear by age 5. But Dorothy is an exception to almost all of these rules. As her life continued, her memories became clearer and more detailed, not the opposite. Skeptics point out that Dorothy's fall can explain pretty much everything that came after. Everything from her obsession with Egypt, her occasional accent changes, visioning, her sleep issues. All of these could some way be tied to some sort of brain injury that she very well could have sustained in that fall. Mm-hmm. They argue that an early obsession can lead to a near mastery of a subject. So just because you're obsessed with the subject, like you could very easily become a master in it because you have an obsession with it.
Especially if you start at like 3 years old.
Yeah, such a young age. Some call it reincarnation, others call it obsession, but regardless, Seti loved Egypt in this life and perhaps those that came before. As author John Cott wrote in part, quote, "For those who believe in the existence of an entity inside us which we vaguely call a soul, and for those of us who believe that love is the light deep within our being that brightens our whole existence and that nobody can extinguish, for those people, no explanation is necessary. For those who do not believe, no explanation is possible." If you're interested in learning more details about Dorothy or Seti's life, for this episode, I read the book called The Search for Seti, Reincarnation and Eternal Love, and that's by Jonathan Cott. And it details her story from childhood all the way up to her death. It includes a ton of her personal writings and experiences with entities and spirits, which go way beyond what I briefly described, and all of the dreams that she had and clues to her previous life that she put together. It's really good. It's really interesting. Or if you're interested in the subject, but maybe just not her particular story, of course, there are tons and tons of examples out there. But there's 2 books that I've read in the past that I really enjoyed about reincarnation. And one is called The Boy Who Knew Too Much, An Astounding True Story of a Young Boy's Past Life Memories. And the other one is titled Soul Survivor, The Reincarnation of a World War II Fighter Pilot.
Cool.
So there you go. There's Dorothy's story.
So interesting. I personally don't think that it could be chalked up to obsession, especially as a child. I mean, maybe later in life you could say that when she's researching all these things. But as a child, she's having these dreams and accents, and she learned, there's just so much weird stuff put together that I can't chalk that up to obsession.
Well, and it's also so interesting that I read a lot about reincarnation and other, obviously, spiritual stuff. But in reincarnation in particular, a lot of the argument is that people who claim to be reincarnated often claim that they are the reincarnate of some big historical figure or famous person or God, somebody that was revered as a god before, things like that. And
someone that everyone could hear about or read
could recognize or know or remember or loved or was worshipped. And then they're also very in this life proud about that and will tell people about it. And for Dorothy, people knew her story, but she never came out as I'm the reincarnated soul of Pentreshet. People are like, who the hell is Pentreshet? She's just this, she had a tragic end. No one really even knew who she was. And I don't know, it's just so interesting that if you're going to make this up, there's other ways to
pick someone. Pick someone bigger.
Right.
Just some random person.
Yeah. And it's just so interesting because it also caused her a lot of problems. I mean, she got a divorce over it. Her family they didn't disown her, but they were kind of like, what the hell is going on?
She was expelled from school.
She was expelled from school. She was expelled, or not expelled from church, but kind of shunned from church. Her beliefs didn't gain her popularity. In fact, they kind of earned her the side eye a little bit.
Yeah, they kind of ostracized her.
Yeah, throughout her life. And she just kind of didn't care. She was just like, I can't really explain this, but it's who I am. And I'm just going to be true to myself and live my life according to my passions and this just happens to be it. And I just thought it was so interesting because, I don't know, a lot of reincarnation stories, like I mentioned at the very end, they fade, like usually it's parents telling the story because the children forget it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's something they do weird things as a child and they know weird things as a child, and then they turn like 5 and they grow out of it.
Yeah, and the reason we have the story is because adults documented it.
Mm-hmm.
And the person who experienced it eventually have no memory of it. So I don't know, Dorothy's story is just so different in so many ways. And I just thought it was so interesting. And that's why I chose to share it, because obviously it has nothing to do with national parks or anything we really ever talk about. But we've been to a couple of the places that were described in the book. And we didn't go to Abydos, where Dorothy spent a lot of her time. But obviously Dorothy lived amongst the pyramids for a while. And in Luxor, we've been to those places. So I just thought it was cool. And I just thought her story was unique.
It is. It's very interesting. I really like the topic. I think it's just so interesting, and it opens up this whole other, like, I don't know. For me, as a listener of the story, the first thing I think about, I'm like, am I reincarnated? Like, who would have I been in the past? It's just like such a kind of fun way to think about your life. Like, who was I previously? Who will I be next?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you right now, if I'm not thinking about stories for work or researching stories for work, as you are very well aware, but I guess for everyone else, I spend all of my time researching and reading about the soul and spiritual, different aspects of spirituality. And I have a spiritual teacher I meet with. I'm very into all of this, and I have gone forward with Akashic readings, and the Akashic record is kind of like the history of your soul.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of going to a medium, which we all know I've been to many times, it's different. It's reading kind of the history of your soul and what your soul's purpose is and what you've done throughout lifetimes, because I do believe that, we live different lives. And so, yeah, I'm very into this without getting too into it, because I don't want to disclose all of everything about me. To say I'm into it would be an understatement. So, but then again, you can't believe every story of reincarnation. Just because I believe in reincarnation doesn't mean I automatically believe Dorothy's story. Is it compelling?
Definitely.
Hell yeah. But I think just with anything, just because you believe in a subject doesn't mean that you accept every version of it.
Sure, that's fair.
But yeah. So speaking of believing things, I also believe in aliens.
What a segue into my story.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well, I do have an alien story just for you. And actually, I was thinking about it when I found this story. I'm like, it's been so long since we've talked about any type of alien thing. And we'll decide later if we think that this has anything to do with aliens or not. But it is. It became a nationwide news story, and thousands of people believed and believe today that it does have something to do with aliens.
Okay.
So my story takes place in Florida, and I'm going to be talking about this alien conspiracy of a supposed alien object that was found on Fort George Island near Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay.
Have you heard of it before?
No, I don't think so.
I found a couple podcasts that covered it, so I was like, God, I hope Danielle hasn't heard this. So this story takes place in the spring of 1974 when a family was walking through the woods and discovered a strange metallic sphere and brought it home, only to later have a lot of strange incidents happen surrounding this orb object. But before we get totally into this story, I do want to link it into a national park. So I want to talk about Fort George Island and the national park site that is located in this region of Florida. So Fort George Island is located on the northeastern coast of Florida outside of the city of Jacksonville. It has a cultural state park on it, but in conjunction to that, part of the island is also Timucuan Ecological and Historic Preserve, which is a national park site. On Fort George is also the Fort George Island Visitor Center, which is managed jointly by the Florida State Parks and the National Park Service because it serves as a gateway to the national park site and to the state park. So they all kind of work in conjunction with each other. The preserve is described as one of the last unspoiled wetlands on the Atlantic coast. It is a national preserve that is comprised of 46,000 acres of beaches, waterways, and wetlands. Estuarine wetlands and waterways encompass over 75% of the park and are important areas for local wildlife. Estuaries are some of the most important productive ecosystems on the planet and provide the breeding grounds for fish, birds, and other animals. The preserve protects the area where St. John's and Nassau rivers meet the Atlantic Ocean and form one of the largest remaining salt marsh estuaries on the southeast coast. This area also preserves over 5,000 years of human history. It is named after the indigenous people who once lived in the area, the Timucua, who were the largest population of indigenous peoples in Florida. They thrived there for years, but were largely killed by disease brought over from settlers in the 1700s. It was established as a national preserve in 1988, which is 14 years after our story takes place. So when this all happened, this is not a preserved area.
Okay, I was going to say, so they took something from a publicly managed site, which is a big no-no.
It is a big no-no, but at the time, this was actually their private property.
Oh, so
where they find it, so it's fine. So our story begins on March 27th, 1974, when Antoine and Jerry Betts had noticed a small brush fire on their property on Fort George Island. And when it simmered down with just a little bit of smoke, they decided with their 21-year-old son, Terry, that they would walk out towards the area to assess any damage the fire may have caused. When they looked across the charred remains of vegetation, there was something shiny that caught their eye. Terry carefully tiptoed around the smoldering dirt to inspect what he was looking at. He lifted it up into the air and presented it to his parents with this confused look on his face. In his hands, he held a strange metallic sphere the same size of a bowling ball, except it wasn't a bowling ball. It was something none of them had ever seen before, and it had a mysterious triangular indent etched into its surface. After a quick discussion about what it could be and revealed no real suggestions, Terry, who was a pre-med student at the time, allowed his curiosity to sway him into bringing it home with them. He could not have known at the time that this strange shiny orb was about to bring mass chaos into their lives. The ball sat in their home for a little bit, and soon it became just this object in their home, and the Betts didn't really think much of it. It was kind of just like this weird artifact that they found and didn't have a story behind, but it was on their property. It wasn't until one day that Terry took out his guitar and started playing that he noticed something was very off about this object. When he began playing, to his surprise, the orb started humming sounds back at him.
No.
This was very strange, and he couldn't rationalize how this could be happening, but then he started to notice some other odd things that were happening surrounding this orb. They noticed that their poodle was acting very strangely towards it. This actually had an aversion to it. They noticed that their dog would try to stay away from it as much as they could, and if their poodle was near it, it would whimper and cry and attempt to cover his ears.
Oh, like maybe it was like emitting some sort of high frequency sound?
Yeah, that's exactly what they thought. Like, maybe this orb has something going on with it where it has this high frequency sound that we can't hear, but the dog can. And later, which I'll mention again because it's in my notes, but later the mom, she says to newspapers, she goes, "There's a really strange sound coming from it. If you hold it up to your ear, it sounds like, you know, if you put your ear up to a light bulb and there's like a slight hum to it, or like a
I've never done that.
Or something. Or like if you hear, you know, like the fluorescent lights in high school.
Oh, yeah.
And there would be like this sound. That's what she described coming from this weird metallic ball.
Mm-hmm.
After noticing that, things only became weirder. This metallic ball started moving on its own accord. Without any known cause, it would roll around their house, and they would sometimes observe it changing directions, and then it would halt abruptly. With no cause, no one pushed it, there wasn't an earthquake, there wasn't anything going on, it would just start rolling around their house.
Get that out of there.
Yeah,
Get it out of there.
This feels like, is it aliens? Is it haunted? I don't know.
I would feel, okay, I'll just let you go on, but I would feel like something would want to come find that.
Yeah, like what energy is
like it's emitting some sort of like signal to like, okay, like come find me and
come get me.
Come get me. Yeah. I want to go home type of thing. Like E.T.
Yeah.
And he's lost. And he was waiting for his family to come back.
And they'll come back.
They're coming. And yeah.
You don't want to be there.
Right.
Well, because it was moving around the floor, they kind of were like, I don't know what's going on. Let's try and put it on our coffee table and see what happens. So they place this ball on their glass coffee table, probably thinking like maybe something's going on with the floors. I don't know. This is very strange. Sounds like they were just trying to make some type of sense of what was going on. But when they placed it on the coffee table, it still rolled. And instead of rolling around and changing directions and abruptly stopping around the whole room, now it was just on this coffee table rolling around in circles and never falling off. It would move around the whole table, but it would never fall off of the table.
Okay, so it's intelligent.
It knows what's going on. They also observed that these instances seem to be happening more frequently on sunny days. So they started thinking that whatever was going on with this ball, that it was powered by the sun. And remember, this is in the 70s. I mean, we know solar panels now are huge and everyone's heard of them, but like solar energy wasn't as big of a thought back then. And they're like, we think that this is being powered by the sun in some capacity. And because the family started having all these questions, they're like, what's going on? Like, what should we do? They started to try to experiment with it a little bit and see like how it would react to certain things. So in one instance, they all sat on the floor together and they tried to roll the ball to each other to see what the ball would do, since it had been like turning and doing its own thing before that. And it didn't work. Each time someone attempted to roll the ball to the other person, it had this boomerang effect where it would just change directions and roll back to the original roller without getting to the other person.
I love this story. Keep going.
It's funny because this is all like reported and true. Like you can still find the articles that, I mean, I wasn't there. I can't confirm that these things really happened, but someone really was reporting that this was going on. And now realizing that something was very strange and that they were in possession of something maybe unworldly, they decided to call newspapers and tell them what was going on. Local papers such as the Jacksonville Journal and the Florida Times-Union covered the story, and a photographer from the Jacksonville Journal confirmed the odd behavior of the ball when he saw it moving himself. So now it's not even the family that's just like, oh yeah, this weird stuff's going on. This journalist came in and was like, whoa, I've seen it too.
It adds validity.
It does. It wasn't long before the story made national news headlines calling the object the Betts Sphere after the family who found it, or it was also entitled the Oddball. Ron Kivett, the host of a local radio show at the time on paranormal phenomenon, was among some of the first to inspect this ball and confirm the claims that it had behaved and moved strangely. He was convinced that this was some type of extraterrestrial orb that was created by some cosmic intelligence. And he wasn't the only person to think that. Newspapers around the country began reporting on this extraterrestrial object, and it became a national sensation. People were so intrigued that news reporters were showing up at their home day and night to try and see it for themselves. The Betts family phone was ringing off the hook from all hours of the day from all over the country, and so many people were inquiring to the family about this that they had to hire a representative for themselves, who was a woman named Jerry, to field all the calls and make comments on their behalf, because there was just so many people coming at them like, what are they saying? What happened? So they had a public representative.
Wow.
I think that it's also important to note for this story, because it took place in the 1970s, that at this period of time, UFOs and extraterrestrials were huge in the media. I mean, this was like everyone had heard of UFOs. Everyone was seeing them in the papers all the time because there were these huge reports of people claiming that they were abducted by aliens, that they saw these strange sightings in the sky. And there was even one instance where it was reported that similar objects to this orb was found. So not long before this incident, there were similar orb-like objects found in Australia that they had suspected to be something of an extraterrestrial origin. So when reports came from Florida, people were intrigued and jumped on the train right away. They're like, oh my God, more, like what's happening? There's UFOs everywhere. What's going on? And they were fully enthralled with it. There's people at their house. And one journalist photographer, Lou Egner, said of the object, who he witnessed firsthand, that it was the darnest thing I ever saw. It seems to have a life of its own.
Ooh.
Mrs. Betts detailed in papers moments of movement, but also the sound that was coming from the ball, a buzzing, similar to how I said with the light bulb. So that sparked a lot of interest once that hit the newspaper. And the ball had sparked so much interest that even the U.S. Navy wanted to investigate it, especially because there were some rumors going around that it could be an old war cannon or some type of military device. Some people even suspected it could be like an undetonized bomb that was just sitting in their house. They're like, what is this?
Rolling around.
They're rolling around their house. It's like, that thing is going to explode.
Yeah.
So the U.S. Navy was kind of like, oh, we kind of want to see what's going on with this. Is it our property? Was almost the thought. And the Betts family was pretty hesitant about that. They didn't want their orb to become property of the government. They were even quoted saying, if they tell us it belongs to the Air Force or some other government agency, they're going to have to come to a separate agreement with us. We aren't just handing this thing over with no questions asked. After all, there is still a lot of legal weight in that old saying about finders keepers.
Right on.
Like, this was found on our property. This is our alien orb. The government can't take it.
Get your own alien orb. You have enough, probably.
Probably. And that was the thing, too. They're like, we can't trust the government with this.
No way.
This is ours. But the family did agree to allow the Navy to examine it, but only after their representative, Jerry, drew up a strict contract that allowed them only 2 weeks with the orb, and it had to be returned in the same condition it was given to them in. So they couldn't like cut it open or smash it up or anything like that. Had to be taken care of properly. After the 2 weeks were up, they gave it back to the family and reported that they hadn't discovered much that they found interesting. They had taken X-ray images of the ball and offered the first official summary of its properties. It measured at 7.96 inches in diameter and weighed 21.34 pounds. They found that the ball was made out of stainless steel and confirmed that it was not their property. They were overall not able to figure out what it was or what it was used for, but they did state that they were very confident that it was created on Earth.
Okay, so it had Earth elements and, you know, it's not like there was some sort of material or
that they didn't recognize or
right,
something.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they also suggested that there was an explanation for why it moved around. And they said that because it had that triangular chip in the surface, that maybe it just set off like the perfect balance of what a round ball would have because it had this chip in it. And they also suggested that the Betts floors were uneven. They were just like, it has a chip in it. It's not a full ball. Like, their floors are probably not even. And they basically just brushed it off as this is nothing. But many people were not convinced. They were like, that sounds like something the government who just found an alien object would say.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm being gaslit.
Yeah. It's like, you found something. It's like, what is that?
Yeah. It's like, oh, this? No, it's nothing at all.
It's not
like
an alien. Aliens don't exist, stupid.
Yeah.
Like, well, you recently confirmed they do, so.
Well, this was, however many, 50 years ago.
But the people didn't believe it. A lot of the people didn't trust the government to reveal any type of UFOs or...
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, they're like, we don't believe you. Of course you would say that. So their findings carried almost no weight in the public eye. So after that, the scientific community also became involved with their own tests. Among the scientists was J. Atkin Hynek, who was a Northwestern University astronomy professor and the best-known UFOologist of the time. They even flew Terry Betts and the sphere out to them to be able to study the object. Again, though, they were unimpressed by it and agreed with the Navy that it was probably something that was man-made, although they also couldn't confirm what it was or what it was used for. Even with experts weighing in that they did not believe this object to be significant, the interest in the sphere did not die down in the public eye. News reports were hounding the family, and they were still receiving phone calls 24 hours a day, and the attention had drastically changed their lives. And everyone now, one, knew who they were, knew them of this orb, which was either they thought they were crazy and like this laughing stock, or they fully believed what they found and wanted to see it for themselves and wanted to know more. So whatever it was, they couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. They were literally getting calls all throughout the night. Their phone was ringing off the hook. They couldn't leave their home. It was just this crazy mess. And they, for a while, they were sticking to their story and they were like, yes, this is happening. These other people have seen it. It's so weird. And then when the Navy came in and these scientists were like, nah, it's nothing. Like, we don't know what it is, but we don't think it's anything. They actually stopped talking about it. They stopped commenting on it. They stopped talking to news reports, news medias about it. And they were just like, okay, our lives are insane now. No one is leaving us alone. We saw what we saw, but we're not telling you guys about it anymore because this has gotten way out of control.
Were they just overwhelmed? Or I don't know. The timing of that seems odd to me.
Yeah.
Were they like told by the government to not say anything?
That's such a good point.
Like, why would it coincide with the release of whatever reports the government has to say of like, okay, now we're not speaking about it anymore?
It's not anything. Well, that's such an interesting point because today the whereabouts of this orb are unknown.
Of course they are.
No one knows what happened to it. No one knows where it is. The Betts all kept their mouth shut about it. They didn't make any comments further after this. And that has actually just increased the mystery and conspiracy theories that are going on today because people are like, where is this orb? What happened to it? What did the Betts do with it? Where can we find it? And people believed it was a UFO. Some people, there were these rumors that went around that this was some atomic bomb that had like, I personally don't believe this, but this is like part of the conspiracy that was going on. That it could be that. Some people wonder if it's related to the brush fire that happened that day. Like, was it dropped with whatever caused that brush fire that was in their yard when they found it? And these are all answers that we might not know, but have stirred up this big controversy.
Okay, so is that the end?
Yeah, that's all we know.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously there's members of this family around, I would assume. The Betts, or is that
Yeah. I couldn't find anything on them, like, as of recent.
Yeah, because they're in witness protection program.
Yeah, because the government got rid of them.
I don't know. I just find the timing is peculiar to me.
That's such a good point, which I didn't really think about when I was researching it. I was like, oh yeah, they must have been overwhelmed with all the attention. But you're so right, because they did have government agencies jump in and then suddenly they're not talking to anyone anymore and the location disappears.
Right. Interesting. Like, to me, as you said, the whole like quote with the like, you know, finders keepers type of thing and whatever, like that's all well and good going into something. And then what happens if the government's like, okay, we're not going to tell anybody else, but this has some sort of extraterrestrial significance or whatever it may be. Here's $1 billion to keep your mouth shut. Don't talk about it again. We're going to take it.
If you do talk,
you're done. You know what I mean? Like some sort of like, I don't know. It's just interesting to me. And of course, like, I mean, it's kind of like the damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like the government is always like, we just don't trust, you know, what they say.
No matter what they say, we would question it.
Exactly. So whether or not they did find anything interesting about it, I just feel like they're just in a difficult place in the eye of the public as far as what people are going to take at face value. So I think that it's obviously interesting because even if it's not any sort of alien origin, then what the hell is it?
What is it? Yeah, my thing is when he was playing guitar and it started humming the noises back at him, and the boomerang thing where it comes back to you and it's just weird. Like, what is it?
Like, it could for certain be man-made, because I think that when it comes to a lot of, I mean, in my experience, what I've learned and seen and whatever on different shows or through books or whatever, when it comes to extraterrestrial ingenuity and like things like that of like supposed recovered alien intelligence, whatever, I think that a lot of people assume a lot of things are of alien origin when in reality they're not. And I think it's because we kind of sell ourselves short. Like, humans are incredibly intelligent, and we do create a lot of things that are unbelievable. Like, technology is crazy, especially now. Like, I would never, like, how did people come up with this or create this or make this or bring this to life? Like, this is wild. And especially in the 70s, you know, if there's some sort of advanced technology that no one really knew about and then someone stumbled upon, of course you're going to be like, there's nothing like this out here. Of course it's alien.
Yeah.
But then again, why would that be out there? And just one of them, and no one takes credit for it. It has no clear purpose, or, you know what I mean? It's just kind of like, it just is so out of place.
Yeah, it's like, what is this for? Where is this coming from? Why is it like, are there weird metal things in it that are making it move? Like, I don't, like magnetic things in it that make it move a certain way, but wouldn't that have been found in the research that scientists and the government are doing? And it's weird. Like, I don't know. I feel like there should be some explanation for what it is, but there's not.
Right. Yeah. Like, instead of them just being like, yeah, it's of stainless steel origin, and we don't know. I don't know. Bye. It's just kind of weird.
Like,
right?
Okay. Yeah. It's just.
What
like,
do you think?
I don't know. Like, I don't know if I believe it's alien or not. I think
okay. Oh, I just had another thought. Sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Tell me.
But just, okay, remember I was like, oh, it's fishy that all of a sudden they've just like stopped commenting and we don't know where it is and whatever, and the government could be involved. What if they're just embarrassed and they're like, okay, we just made like this big deal out of nothing, and now we don't want to talk about it because there's nothing to talk about and you can't see it because it's nothing, and we just don't even want to acknowledge it anymore.
That's true. I mean, I think that's definitely a valid option, because I think about some type of magnetic field that might have been inside the ball that could explain the movements of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about the sound stuff, but I mean, it definitely could just be embarrassed.
I don't know. It's a mystery to us all, and I guess that's why we have no answers.
Either the government is involved or they're embarrassed.
But what is there to be? I don't know. Whatever. I don't know. Just for the sake of saying it, I feel like maybe there's some sort of unexplained. But then again, why? I don't know.
What's the triangle for? What's the meaning of the triangle?
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah.
A triangle on a circle. A triangle is the strongest shape there is on a circle.
There's got to be a deeper meaning.
Yeah.
And it's heavy, right? For something small, it's heavy.
Yeah, it was like 25 pounds almost.
Yeah. For like a small you said 7 inches in
diameter. It's just like a broken kettlebell. Like, you know, they have the handles on the top. Yes. That's probably a triangle.
It's like a piece of trash.
They're like, oh, what is this?
What is it? It's alien intelligence.
Like, not quite.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing either way.
You're welcome.
And I had not heard of that, so.
That's good. There were a couple podcasts that covered it, and I was like, oh no.
Oh no, she might know. Yeah, no. This was a fun episode. I know it's been, like we said in the beginning, it was a little odd, but just a little change up for the week. We were just feeling silly.
Yeah, we just wanted some light. We've had some like darker episodes and some heavier ones, and it's always fun to just like hop on and talk about something that interests us, and it's kind of a little bit more fun.
Yeah, it is. I would agree. Okay, well, thanks everyone for listening. We will see you next week. In the meantime, enjoy the view.
But watch your back.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us again this week. If you have a trail tale or story suggestion, send us an email at stories@npadpodcast.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at National Park After Dark and on Twitter at NPAD Podcast. Join our Outsiders Only community on Patreon or Apple subscriptions to listen ad-free, unlock monthly bonus episodes, and exclusive content.
And remember, when you support our sponsors, you are supporting our show. For our exclusive discount codes and source information from today's episode, check out the show notes. For more information on our show, our book recommendations, merch updates, and more, visit our website at npadpodcast.com. And please rate, review, and subscribe from wherever you listen to podcasts.